This is the pump assembly from the car, and I've had these apart before, pulled them apart, but I've never actually done this upgrade, so you'll have to bear with me as I learn the process on the go. There's the pump assembly exactly as it came out of the car. We've got a new pump here to go in. This is the Walbro 535 litre an hour pump. Comes as a little kit with a little filter pad there, which we won't be using, so we'll discard that. Also comes with a connector, optional if you want to use part of that or all of that. We'll go over that later. This is the part number, so it's a Walbro F9 quadruple O 295. That's the part number of it. Other things we need for this job, some replacement E85 compatible 10mm hose. So we have one 300mm piece. Ideally you need at least 280mm. The one that we're going to be replacing I think is 305 or 310mm. A little bit longer would also be alright, so somewhere between 280 and 320mm. A short piece of hose, this will be replacing a piece here that is 120 to 130mm long. The piece I've got is of 120mm, and this is 10mm or 3/8 internal diameter. Also have some of these Otica clamps, and the Otica clamp, or it's actually not an Otica clamp tool, but it will do the job to compress these Otica clamps, and a plug set. So don't really need all of this. The type of connector here on the Walbro pump is a, what is it called, an MP280, multi-pack 280 I think, and from that kit, this kit here came from Racetronics. It's an RCS 060. We're going to only use though half of the kit, the male part of the plug, the female connectors there, and to connect into this end. And apart from that, a few other tools, some special crimping pliers to crimp these connectors on. They're sort of optional. You can do it with a pair of needle nose pliers if you're very careful. We also need a whole bunch of flat blade screwdrivers, small ones, medium ones, to pull everything apart. I've got a heat gun here on the side and a soldering iron as well. So jumping into it, and a pair of cutters here. So to start, it's optional if you take out or remove the fuel gauge sender unit here. You can pull back on the tabs quite a bit. It's quite a, yeah, I might try and do it leaving that in. I have taken those out before. We'll leave that in. So the first step is going to be to cut one of these hoses. It's this hose here. So the hose, you cut this hose here, it goes down inside. So there's one attached to the top of the housing there. We're going to leave that one attached, or it appears to be the top of the housing. It's just a fitting underneath. This one here, we're going to cut through that one. Cut that out of the way. Then we've got two little tabs here on the side. Push those in. Screwdriver might help. Turn it upside down. Now the pump assembly will come out. So we had to cut that hose to be able to remove that. From there, we've left that connected, and that now that gives us visibility now of the filter pad assembly. This has actually still got a field on it, still wet from being taken out of the car. Next step is going to be to remove the pump. So a couple of tabs here on the side. Push in on those. Pull that back and out. Now the electrical connectors here. We can pull them off. For memory, need a little screwdriver. So push down on the tab. Now, completely remove that. Push that through there. Now we're going to be reusing this fitting here, and so we need to cut it off. The easiest way is just to use a very sharp scalpel. Okay, fitting out. The other thing you do is take this filter pad off. So the new filter pad that came with the new pump isn't going to be used. We use this other one because it's part of the assembly that locks the pump into place in the bucket. So let's remove that. It's just a press fit on there, so I'm just going to carefully get under here and just pry up a little bit on each side. There we go. That's the filter assembly removed. Now, probably clean that in some brake cleaner. There's a little bit of debris here on the bottom, so we'll wipe that off. There we go. This is just a pre-filter, I guess, so it's just taking out any large particles. So there's the old pump. We'll put that aside. Get a new pump and put this assembly on. So really there's a locating dowel here, locating dowel on here and a hole there. So this goes on like so. Press that in place. That's on. Now we need to put the 300mm hose on. So that's their new, well, that's the old connector, the new hose. The original hose is just over 300mm long. Let's do a comparison here. So the black hose is 300mm and it's probably about 3/4 of an inch, about 20mm longer. So if you get yourself a probably 280mm to 320, 340mm hose should be fine. Those Otica clamps that I started with, these ones here were no good. So a week has passed, so it's taken me to get some replacements. They were not quite big enough, so I've got these ones here which are the 2-ear type that have an ear on each side, and these are the 11 to 13mm size, which has worked well. I've got the first one on, so there's my 300-odd-millimeter piece of hose there on, and I've crimped that. These, as I mentioned earlier, aren't technically Otica clamp pliers, and the pair I've normally got I can't find. So these get it started, and then I'm using a pair of these nail removing pliers, which have got a very sharp edge, which makes me a bit nervous, but just using them to crimp the last little bit, and now that is super tight on there, it's not going anywhere. So first hose is on there, and we can move on. So yeah, these 12.3mm Otica clamps are a fraction too small. The fitting that goes on the other end of this was this one here. That's the genuine one that came off. That part actually lives on the filter assembly here it is here, so that part goes on there. I've decided I'm not going to reuse the original one. I'm sure you can, but I want that for another job I'm doing, so I've bought a replacement. This is an E85 compatible component for the Otica clamp here. Grab one of those. Always remember now, thread that on first, and then push this fitting on. That's going to pass up through there, so nothing stopping me from putting this one on. Yeah, slide that back down. As I said, these aren't the ideal ones for the job. They are working. It's not going anywhere. It's plenty tight enough. Okay. Now, just to also point out, I didn't maybe make it clear, these pumps, the physical dimensions of them are, well, virtually the same, not quite in that length, but the critical dimensions are identical, so they are completely interchangeable in that regard. So now this will be ready to go back up through here. So filter assembly on the inside, folding up onto the inside there. There we go, that's done. Okay, now cut this piece off of here, and this is where the heat gun also comes in handy. If you want to heat it up, you can to remove it, but otherwise knife will do the job. Move the other piece from in here, so other end of it, just carefully. They're the two pieces. Take a measurement. It's about 125 to 130 millimeters, so anywhere between 120 and 140 millimeters. The replacement piece that I've got is 140, slightly longer. That'll be fine. So that'll be put aside, and we're going to put it onto this end first and crimp that on. And then later, once it's all put back together, we'll crimp the last bit on, crimp the other end on there afterwards. Otica clamps. There they fall on any which way. Don't damage that. Feels like it's going to be a bit tight. Just spray a bit of silicone spray. There to help it go on. Okay. Now this is going to be interesting. To crimp the Otica clamp. I have to crimp one side, I think, and then spin it round, and there's not much coming over for that, so as low as it'll go. I'm just going to partially crimp one side just a little bit. Hopefully it's firm. Get that over. spin it around and then crimp the other side on there. Go. That's on there. It's a bit of a test though. Yeah, so just half crimp one side, that way you spin the one that you first crimp around to the back and then access the other one. That's good. Okay, this can go back together. It's a nice firm fit. Now I'm not going to crimp that one just yet, just in case I need to take this apart for any reason later. I do have to connect the wires up yet, the plug is out. So I'm going to need a female receptacle to go into a male plug, or two female receptacles. A couple of those. So the connector from the new pump has a red wire and a white wire. Red is positive, white is earth. And the wiring, original wiring from the car is brown wire, which is positive, so brown's going to go to red, and a black wire, which is ground, or earth, which is going to go to the white wire. Now these wires are longer than they need to be, so I'm going to trim a little bit of them off. Don't go too much. Those off. Some wire strippers. More than enough. I'm only going to need a few millimeters showing there. Yeah, I've got a soldering iron here ready. It's not critical to have the soldering iron or to do this, but I do recall at trade school learning that sometimes it's not a good idea to solder, because joints are less flexible when they're soldered and will be more likely to break. Shorten this brown one slightly. Okay, these little blue things can go on next. I'll feed them on in preparation. And now the receptors. Now, I think, looking at the plug that's put together, so I just put less twist in the wires. I'm going to work out the alignment of everything. So with the red on the right, sorry, the red on the left, or the brown on the left. Just connect like so. These are the special crimping pliers. If you don't have these, you can get very small pointy nose pliers and fold down those little tabs. There's a perfect job of folding them over. Now, get a little bit of solder in there as well. That should ensure we have a very good connection. And trying to get the connectors rotated in about the same position. Once again, so we don't have to twist the wires. A little bit of solder. Just use some pointy nose pliers to fold these over. So that's a little bit neater by cutting them a bit shorter, a bit better than what I did there. But since I've soldered it, it's definitely not going anywhere. I might put a little bit more solder on that brown one. Okay, now the plug, and they push through. No real twisting in those wires, so that's good. Little blue plug things go in. And then this end piece. It's on, like so. And then that will clip together. There we go, nice solid connection, and confirm the brown is in line with the red and the black is in line with the white. And last thing to do, now we know it's all good back together, is to crimp that last Otica clamp. And that is the pump assembly all put back together, ready to go back in the car. And a little final note, the original pump that came out of the car has a check valve fitted to it, and the purpose of the check valve is to keep pressure between the low pressure pump, this fuel pump, and the high pressure fuel pump, to ensure that the car starts quickly after the key is turned or after the start button is pushed. Now, the check valve is actually a limiting factor, or limits the capacity of this pump. So the new pump that I've fitted, the Walbro 535, or 295 as some people call it based on the part number, the 535 litre an hour pump doesn't have a check valve, and so I need to fit an external check valve in the fuel line outside of the fuel tank. So this is going to be going between the low pressure fuel pump or the fuel tank and the high pressure fuel pump. And this is just a one-way check valve, and so when this pump shuts off, it will let liquid flow fuel flow back into the tank, but this will hold some up against the high pressure fuel pump so that when I start the car it doesn't have a long crank. There's no real other downside to it. If you're happy to have a long crank and you want the capacity of the 535, then this is really optional. The other option, if you don't want to fit an external valve and you don't want a long crank, is to use the Walbro 525 pump. There's also a Walbro 450 pump. The 450 and the 525 both have check valves fitted in them like the original one, but the Walbro 450 is really not that much better, or doesn't have any real capacity improvement over the original pump. So the Walbro 525 litre an hour pump would be the one to choose if you don't want long cranking and don't want to bother with an external check valve.